Recording started.
Hello, everybody. I want to welcome you to this week's May Checks discussion group call for tactical sovereignty. Like I say, this wonderful Sunday, the first day of the week, not the seventh, and therefore also not the Sabbath. Just one of the many things we know we've all been tricked by, I guess. Well, this evening I've got a buddy on with me. I've got Chris Rice from Rice TV. If you are listening to this over TalkShoe, the links for him are in the description box. If you hear this over YouTube, hopefully I'll have the same in the description box there. But Chris is a good researcher. He's someone I've really come to enjoy listening to, especially with the amount of different people that he interviews, because that's something, that I try to do here, interview as many people as possible, get people, viewpoints from a lot of different directions. He's had Jeff Berwick on. He has Ethan Lucas on now and then talking about, the law and spirituality. Of course, he's had David Williams on, who's been here with us quite a few times. And, the list goes on and on. Different names people would probably know, like Alphonse or Jeff Belair. But oh, and can't forget our dear friend Russell J. Gould has been on with him as well. But anyway, how you doing tonight, Chris?
Dude, I'm doing great, and I really appreciate you inviting me to come on your show. I appreciate you coming, making a couple appearances on Rice TVX as well. So definitely looking forward to the conversation and looking forward to being more in the passenger seat than the driver's seat tonight.
Yeah, I guess the roles are kind of reversed a little bit here, aren't they?
Yeah, but I enjoy it. I'm used to controlling the conversation by me being the one doing the interview. So I like answering questions. Plus, it gives people an opportunity to get to know more about me in ways that I can't express on my own channel without sounding like completely egotistical. And, this is me and this is who I am. This is, so I don't constantly remind people about that. So doing these kind of appearances help with being able to let my viewers, people who follow my content, kind of get a glimpse inside of my head and kind of comprehend why I do what I do, the method behind my madness.
Well, speaking of, doing what you do and why you do what you do, I think a lot of people would probably be interested to find that you've kind of entered into this in the same position that many of us have found ourselves here. So, why don't you explain, why you do what you do and interview the people that you've interviewed on your show?
Sure. Well, originally when I started my channel, which was January of 2018, the channel was focused on cryptocurrency, economics, and the ideologies of anarchy and voluntarism. And I got really bored with, after about a year and a half of what I was doing, 2 years, just got really monotonous and started expanding out the channel. Now, before I expanded out, I mean, it was about financial freedom, educating people, teaching people about these ideologies, about what anarchy means and such. And so there was, always a purpose of sovereignty involved. But it wasn't until I started expanding my channel out and exploring different routes, separating my content by having 3 different shows, going from Rice Crypto as a brand name to Rice TVX. I've been very fortunate with the people I've been blessed to have, on my show to interview. Been able to interview John McAfee more times than anybody else. Unfortunately, he's passed away now. I did 7 interviews with him. A lot of times I'm trying to bring people on to either memorialize and try to capture a moment in time about what these individuals do, to inspire others. I do try to bring on content creators and people who have shows that YouTube has taken off the platform to give them a voice. So a lot of my content tends to be edgy. And then when I started expanding out my channel and restructuring and adding in the Stranger Than Fiction show, which was giving me an opportunity to look into law and the legal fiction and study history and talk about history and talk about spirituality, even law and spirituality, like with Ethan Lucas. So I try to bring a variety of guests on that can provide different viewpoints. I always try to challenge what I think I know so I can concrete know what I know. And um, also at the same time, there's a lot of selfishness that comes involved because I get to have these conversations with these individuals, and some of those times it ends up developing into something more than just an interview. And I actually have relationships with some of these individuals, and that also is very surreal. I mean, I've interviewed a lot of people who are very well known in the cryptocurrency space, like Roger Ver, the creator of Litecoin, Charlie Lee, one of the co-founders of Ethereum, the creator of Cardano, Charles Hoskinson, people like Jeff Berwick, G. Edward Griffin, who wrote the Creature from Jekyll Island, and then be able to have people like Lynette Zhang from ITM Trading and George Gammon from Rebel Capitalist, and then be able to explore the law element, inviting people on, ranging from Anna von Reitz to Carl Lentz to David Williams, Alphonse Fagiolo, a plethora of different individuals, and just really try to learn as much as I possibly can, share that experience with viewers so they can share information, and ultimately just try to figure out ways of being truly sovereign. So the financial freedom aspect expanded out because it's only a piece of the puzzle for true sovereignty. Financial freedom is definitely something that comes into play with that, in my opinion. So I hope that answered that question.
Yeah, no, and you're absolutely correct. It really comes down to the coin of the realm, and it seems like even if you go way back in history, like to the so-called medieval times, up through even today, and you look at different people that might be in, say, like the truth movement or something like that, it seems like the people that always get in trouble are the people who mess with the coin of the realm, you know, messing with,
100%.
like, creating liens, or, what they call fictitious instruments or things like that, you know.
Or
So,
even like you mentioned, watching my interview with Bernard von Nothaus, who was the creator of the Liberty Dollar, um, and how that was kind of a competition, a threat against the coin of the realm, which is the U.S. dollar being the world reserve currency. Something I wanted to ask you real quick, and I was just checking on your TalkShoe channel. Are we live or are we just recording?
we're live.
Okay, because it's not showing that we're live on like it's not showing me the video. It's just saying stream is offline.
Hmm.
It's
I'm not
weird.
sure. Yeah, I'm not sure why it says that.
But
Everything's good here.
okay. I just want to make sure.
Yeah.
Is because I was hoping there was a way I could look at like chat in case people were watching, and you said something about potentially opening it up for questions towards the end, and I try to pay attention to the live chat.
Right. Well, let me see. There's nothing in chat right now that I see
Okay.
on there. But yeah, you mentioned having G. Edward Griffin on. He's been on here with us as well. And, there's, to me, kind of a deeper story, I think, there behind the whole story with Jekyll Island that goes more into what I'm really researching now, really, which is, the peopling of the Americas, and the DNA specifically, really where people came from, how they, migrated here or emigrated here. And there's a pastor up in northeastern Florida, towards, I believe, Jacksonville area. His first name is Tim, but he had kind of an urge or a calling to go visit Jekyll Island, and he really wasn't sure why, but he called the hotel there, and he scheduled a stay for one night. And when he got there, the receptionist looked at him and called him by name, and he was kind of surprised by that. And she said, "Okay, here's your information. Just sign in here." He looked at the papers. He said, oh, wait a minute. He said, I scheduled one night. It says this has me listed for 2 nights. And she said, yeah, she said, I took the call from you. And she said, but something told me that you're going to need 2 nights instead of just one. And he's like, okay. But anyway, during his stay there, he got to meet um, a gentleman who really took care of the facilities. And the guy asked him, do you want me to show you around some things that most people don't see? And he was like, sure. And he took him and showed him a picture. It was a picture of like a stone altar with Indians around it that looked like, I can't say exactly what they were doing. It was a ritual that had to do with a very young offspring, I'll put it that way.
Hmm.
And he thought, this pastor thought, gosh, this is really weird. I never heard of American Indians doing things like this. This would have been the Timucua tribe. And the guy said, sure. He said, would you like to see this stone altar? He was like, yeah, sure. Can I? He's like, yeah. He said, where's it at? He says, well, it's, you know, in the Rockefeller house underneath basically the living room, which was the parlor where they sat and developed the idea for the Federal Reserve Act. And I mean, to me, that was kind of mind blowing.
I mean, yeah, I have not had the entire read the entirety of the book because it's a very thick book, The Creature from Jekyll Island from G. Edward Griffin. But there's also Murray Rothbard. He's got a book on the Federal Reserve, and I just recently had my second interview with Hotep Jesus, who wrote a book called The Patriot Report that kind of gives some additional information and a different perspective than the Jekyll Island book about the creation of the Federal Reserve, because it was, and that was one of the things we discussed on our show, that the Federal Reserve was the third or fourth attempt. I believe it was really the fourth attempt at central banking in the United States. But a lot of history shows it to be the third. But what's interesting is, like, when you start researching about, because I'm probably going to do a video sometime this week about the history of money and banking. And a lot of it, from minus the distorted history, goes back to Venice, which goes back to the Phoenicians. So the Phoenicians and their money magic debt system, Babylonian money magic debt that people talk about in the legal fiction realm, reapplies back to that. So I find that very fascinating, and um, the whole history of banking and how this took place, because a lot of people think about the what is the family name, the Rothschilds, as being like one of the main perpetrators, but the Rothschilds kind of came in later in the game. It was more of the time period around a little before Napoleon, a little before, because, and also another thing that I didn't put in perspective was that during the Revolutionary War time period was also the same time period as when the Napoleonic Wars were going on. So and that's when the banks were getting involved with basically um, giving money to both sides, all sides. And then when you mention coin of the realm, it kind of ties back to me to Game of Thrones. And in Game of Thrones, they had the Iron Bank, which was kind of in that central bank position of like the IMF today. It's fascinating.
Yeah, yeah, it's really interesting. I think the Rothschilds, aren't they holders of the trust for the Vatican? I believe they've got some involvement with that.
There's speculation and talk, but I mean, for me, especially, I mean, when it comes to a lot of this, I've been trying to find as much evidence and proof to back up these things so that it doesn't seem more conspiracy and it seems more realistic. So that's kind of where I've taken a little bit of a back step with some of the legal fiction stuff. But I'm going to be bringing on returning guests and new guests and still continuing down that rabbit hole. I just went through a period of time where I got really burned out on talking to a lot of individuals because so much differing opinions on a lot of things. And then you bring in someone like David Williams or Alphonse Fagiolo, who kind of throw a wrench in a lot of other people's philosophies and things that they're doing. So it's kind of like what is real and what isn't real, and trying to sift through that information. I was at one point going to be trying to bring together a lot of these teachers and groups, but that was an asinine idea on my part. I'm thinking that I could get people to work together for one and put egos aside. That was the biggest challenge that I thought could be. But just, I mean, it seems like everybody wants to be correct. They
Right.
want to be the one. And I'm not going to even mention anybody's name in particular, but there's people copying other people's models and then putting down the people that they're copying the models of.
Right.
But
Well,
basically, like a franchisee of the person that they're saying that they don't like.
yeah. One of the people that you mentioned that you've interviewed, I've talked to, I'll just say them, um, quite a while ago. I had a few conversations with them and tried to pinpoint, where were they getting their information at, because they never showed any source material. You know what I mean? So I was contacting them going, where did you find this, or where did you find that? Because I'd like to research into that a little further. And they just said to me, I'm sorry, I really don't know. I just copy and paste. And I
You
thought,
don't want to
oh,
mention who it was, though?
it was probably the only female that you mentioned.
Okay. Okay.
And so I was like, you're kidding me. And I was like, okay, that tells me pretty much all I need to know then. But, and that's one of the things too. Now, some of the people you've interviewed that, I pretty much see pretty eye to eye with. And I think it's because what we have all done is very similar, which really, as far as the legal fiction goes, it just really comes down to how you position yourself or you position your relationship regarding the legal fiction or that artificial entity. And that would be David Williams and Robert Michael. And whenever I get on the phone with either of them, it normally always ends up being a 2 or 3 hour long conversation, because we kind of resonate with each other's thinking very
Yeah.
well.
Well, I mean, and I love David Williams, but he will talk your ear off. It's as if he is like, and I know he's not in this position, but it's as if he doesn't have any human communication at all. So he has to take in when he has it, he has to take it in because he never knows when he's going to get more. But he seems to be this way with everybody. And so I think he just enjoys talking, and I think he enjoys hearing himself talking. Sometimes I do too. So I'm not
Yeah.
going to fault Mr. Williams for it, but yeah, I always had to at least prepare myself for a minimum of 2 hours. And sometimes we're having 45-minute conversation before we even start. And so but we have good conversations, and I don't mind having long conversations with people like that, especially when they're very thought provoking and it's not a boring subject that people's brainwaves are just going to be fading off, not being able to pay attention. So I do appreciate, and I do want to get them involved in some debates. So I'm just trying to figure out the right opportunities, the right people, so I can have it be as cordial as possible.
You
Same
might
thing with.
want to weave into that idea of having a timer.
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean, I would have to. I haven't ran an official debate, and it's been a while since I've been involved in one. But remember opening statements and giving people equal time and keeping a timer. And the good thing about it is if I'm running a video and I'm recording it through something like StreamYard, I can mute the other individuals until it's time for them to talk.
Yeah.
And if somebody's running over their time, I could be rude and just be like, your time was up and now you're going over your time. So I'm just going to mute you and prevent you from communicating.
Yeah. Gonna pull out Robert's Rules of Orders for debating.
So yeah, Robert would be somebody that I would like to get in, in a debate with someone like Alphonse, but Alphonse isn't ready to do anything like that until he gets some of his legal workings behind him. And I'm not sure how long that's going to take, but
Right.
I'm still kind of trying to put a little bit of pressure on him since he's kind of on this whole idea of saying that there's no such thing as status correction. That it doesn't exist, and there's no need to do it, and there's no benefit, and there's no nothing. It's make believe. And that's one of those things that I really want to try to get spelled out. I've looked into a few things. Um, I'm getting ready. I haven't done it yet because I've had traveling and been sick, but I'm gonna apply for my passport using that method on the Copper Moonshot still site or whatever the site's called.
Yeah, I'm not sure I really recommend copper moonshine, but as far as saying that
Well,
there's no such thing as
that method is one thing that I will say that a lot of different teachers and groups agree on.
uh,
David Straight, I think
uh,
Ken
uh,
Cousins.
uh,
Um, so I mean, Kelby Smith. There's a plethora of individuals that have, and there's some people that I know individually that have followed these routes and claim that they've had change in treatment. But I'm gonna go through the process and then try to have law enforcement have a reason to run my stuff and or try to find a cool law enforcement officer to run my stuff and try to tell me if this shows anything different than what it would show anybody else's
that that's really
passports would
what
be.
that's really what I need to find because I mean the last year I've had a couple incidents where there are guaranteed go to jail incidents for anybody, and I didn't
Right.
even get a ticket and was free to go. So I was like, God, I knew there had to be something going on, and I had already decided that several years ago from things that had happened. But to anybody that says there's no such thing as status correction, I would just simply have to ask them, then how do they view the naturalization process? What's the naturalization process all about? Because that's exactly what that is. It's a status correction from one country to another.
Right, but saying like, okay, there's nothing written in history in the history books that I can find that prior to the 14th Amendment, the creation of the US citizenship status, that there was a status that existed. So what are you correcting? What are you correcting to? So some people are trying to say that there is a state citizen or a state national or an American national. I've seen American national being used, but it apparently all US citizens are American nationals as well. It's
Correct.
kind of, but it doesn't give you any special privileges to not be a US citizen and to be an American national. I think that the way that that would happen is people that are that live in US territories that aren't states, I think they would be considered American nationals.
Yeah, it's the Samoan Islands, I believe, is one of the main ones.
I believe. Now I could be wrong with this. And another thing that I want to explore is trying to talk to some open-minded attorneys, because I've had conversations with some attorneys like at bars and stuff like that, and try to have talk about the British accreditation registry or the different names of what bar can stand for, and I'm not finding any sort of consensus among these type of individuals. So again, I mean, there's nothing really that's 100% spelled out that that's what the bar association stands for.
Yeah, I did an article a couple weeks ago on the bar, and whenever you see the bar mentioned, it's always upper lowercase bar. It's never all uppercase.
Right, and they
The
don't
only
try to say it's supposed to be short for barrister, I believe.
Okay, well, what I found is the term bar actually came from an entrance on Fleet Street that went into the area where the Temple Bar was located at in England, the city of London. And that originally,
And see, that
that,
sounds like a church. That sounds like a bar inside of a church,
yeah,
a
right.
temple bar.
Yeah.
Like, is
But,
that where we get that holy wine?
yeah, right. But it originally, that gate right there had originally just been a chain that went across that entranceway. And then later on, that chain was changed to a bar, a literal bar that fell across it. And then, and sometimes they would hold court, a couple hundred years ago in the outdoors. And there would be a bar similar to what used to look like where you would tie your horse up at, right? And that went in between where you stood or whatever and where the judge was at. And so the bar is just kind of a figurative term. It's not an acronym. It's never been an acronym that was dreamed up by somebody. I've got a friend who has a Westlaw link, and him and I sat the other day actually because I think he saw my article, and he went through Westlaw and basically did spider search, if people are familiar with that, and just did an entry for British accredited registry or British accredited registration, all sorts of different things.
Yeah, and you won't find
And
it.
no, there's nothing listed anywhere.
But people and groups and teachers are perpetrating that information. And you know, I mean, it's you can see that the city of London is a separate sovereign state, separate outside of England and the UK. Same
Right,
thing with Vatican City. Same thing with Washington D.C. in the aspect of where it stands. But
right,
you can't say that the bar association stands for British accreditation, anything with our registry, whatever the situation might be, unless you can. And these things need to be factually backed up. Otherwise, it just looks like conspiracy theory. It just looks like
yeah,
like um, I'm not saying that law, land, air, water doesn't make any sense, that people could have put that together. But when you take that word and you translate it to other languages that came before ours, when the word law existed, does that translate the same way? Because not in all times will that be the case. So, in, from my comprehension, especially if we're looking in something like Latin, it's not the same alphabet.
right,
So you know, it's not gonna law may not be three letters that each one stands for land, air, and water. You know, it's more that could be more of this a thing that people have made up from this mutt language that we call English. That's like a combination of the Anglo-Saxon and German.
right. And I've been researching this stuff for probably what 6 or 7 years now, and I have only seen in the last like 2.5 years maybe that whole land, air, water thing appeared. And it was just something somebody dreamed up, and it's
Well,
cute, but it doesn't mean anything.
I think Jordan Maxwell might have been one of the first people kind of pushing that, and then Jordan just kind of got on to be a broken record with just saying the same thing and not really backing it up, just talking about the maritime law and how the water has overbreached the land, and why the birthing process is called what it is, and why like the flow of money is like a currency, and there's liquidation and there's liquidity and there's all these different water related terms and things. But again,
Right.
if you translate these to other languages, does that work out? So Jordan Maxwell, somebody who I think he's getting old. Trying to get him on the show, um, and I may have to pay him for his time, unfortunately. But I would like to have a conversation and try to find out if he can like actually provide any evidence to back up the talk of the maritime law situation being completely in effect. Because if you explain this to an attorney that they've raised the watermark invisibly over top of the world, that it's now covered in water like water world, people are like, what the
Yeah.
hell are you talking about?
Right. And well, and he's actually one of them that did. I don't know about law, but he did bring up British accredited registry before, and I actually did find a listing for that in England. And I looked through their records, and it didn't look like they really had anything to do with the legal system whatsoever.
Now if
um,
somebody's listening to this and they can fact check and find some information that because I'm open-minded, I'm not right about everything, I'm trying to learn. So if I'm wrong about something, I'll be the first to admit it if I'm provided with information that shows that what I said was wrong.
yeah. Yeah, and a lot of these people, I mean, I necessarily don't really call out or anything. I would call out somebody like David Straight, who I would say is nothing but total rubbish. And so much of his stuff just doesn't make sense if people even just
Well, I
used a
want to
little bit of thinking when they
with
listened.
him, I've been trying to, you know, weigh this over for quite some time because I was going to have him on the show a couple times, and then he canceled for whatever reason, and then a lot of information started coming out about him maybe not saying the truth about him being in the military and things to that effect. And I would like to give him an opportunity to prove and show that what he says is true versus not being sure and seeing like Vice news pieces that may be designed as a hit piece to make them look bad. So I want to try to give them the benefit of the doubt. But if you're going to make claims,
Right.
you should be able to back up the claims that you make. If you can't back up the claims that you make, then you're lying about something. And that would be like someone like Greg Howlett. That was one of the things that I started expanding my channel out on. This guy from the UK who was claiming to be the rightful king of England, the title of Christ, the king of the world. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I
him and
researched him.
Russell would have been good friends.
Yeah. Well, I think David, though, would have to do way too much uphill backpedaling to reverse a lot of the claims that have been made there. I mean, I remember when I was listening to him talk about rescuing children and things like that. He mentioned how they went into the hills of Arkansas in the wee hours of the morning and snatched a pedo out of the hills of Arkansas and loaded him on a C-130 and took him down straight to Gitmo.
Yeah.
And
Well, his
I'm
stories,
thinking, wait a
his
minute, how are you landing a C-130, which is a huge cargo plane, in the hills of Arkansas?
because
And why would you
it's
use
David
something like
Strait,
that?
damn it. That's why. I mean, like him talking about being on Melania Trump's task force. I'm not even sure that Melania Trump even did things like that. It didn't seem like she was involved in politics on that level. She was more of like just doing the normal first lady stuff, which is like making appearances and starting a nonprofit and those kind of things, not actually being involved in a task force that are rescuing children. I just don't gather that from. Maybe I'm misjudging Melania, but it would have made the story would have made more sense if it was Trump.
Yeah, I don't see that as being a genre that she would be playing in necessarily.
Right.
But
Because he talks about his experiences being at the White House, having a very minimal communication with Trump, and I've heard him. He doesn't keep to the stories that he makes up. So it's unfortunate. He does know a lot of good information about history, and I do. That's what I do try to take is the good pieces of what people are presenting, because just because there might be some bad actions or some untruthful information doesn't make everything that they're saying worthless. Because I think between David Strait and Audubon Rights, they have a lot of information that they've done with research in regards to history, especially American history, that I find very invaluable, regardless if I agree with what they're doing with their teachings.
yeah, I don't know. Um, I like a lot of the history, for instance, that David Williams has brought up because, he'll show you resource material or he'll give you names or whatever as to where to look. And so when I have gone and looked, I've been able to validate everything that's been said by him.
Well,
And
the one thing I will say about Anna von Reitz and is and David Straits is that they, even though they do give good information, they do try to point you in a direction that they want to point you in, as opposed to trying to give it more unbiasedly and backing it up with facts. But I mean, even David Williams is trying to lead you somewhere with that, but he's providing more documentation to back up what he's saying to make it look more valuable of information versus just somebody's opinion.
yeah,
Like, because the one thing that David Strait was saying is that um that Abraham Lincoln and Karl Marx were friends and had regular communication. Um, History doesn't necessarily say that, and I've looked into this area from a couple different angles and such, and the most that I'm seeing is that they had some written communication towards the end of the Civil War, but I don't believe there was much more than that. And
right.
it was mainly like them discussing, what had taken place with the Civil War, and in comparison to the book that Karl Marx wrote, the Communist Manifesto. But in that light, um, David Strait wants to paint, and I'm not saying this is not true or not true, but paint Abraham Lincoln as being a socialist who worked for the banks. Um, and I can't 100, saying that, that he was a part of the British accreditation registry system. But he was a bar member, and he was the first president that I know of that was a member of the bar association. Was supposed to be unconstitutional based off the original 13th Amendment, apparently, but there's no real technical proof of that really being the case because a lot of those records were burned in DC in, what was it, 1812, something like that.
Well, and there's still plenty of information within the Constitution regarding somebody holding a title of nobility, which is what they were referring to the 13th Amendment as. They were referring to the Titles of Nobility Act or whatever. And so you can find plenty of that in the Constitution. But if you
Because
read the wording of it, it's perfectly okay as long as Congress consents to it.
Well, yeah, because I mean, the problem with something like that is that you have a loyalty above your country by having those kind of agreements. So that was the idea: is if you're not beholden to anybody. I definitely think that we need to rethink how we do politics and the effects of like what a politician gets for being a politician and what takes place to a politician after that said politician is no longer in that capacity. It needs to go back more to a public servant kind of situation that people are pushed into that don't want to do it. And it needs to become more of a service versus what it's become.
Well, I think really that a lot of people want to say the takeover America started at 1871, and in my opinion, the takeover America really started with the changeover from the Articles of Confederation to the U.S. Constitution in 1789. And I think that's when the real takeover occurred. People would say they want to go back to the republic or whatever. Well, we still have a republic. If you
Well,
look at the definition of what a republic is, we still have a republic.
we got in debt to banks. We borrowed money from French bankers, and we're in debt for that. And it said that the banks in the city of London paid off that debt, which meant that the United States owed them, which would be like the Crown Incorporated, which would be, in a sense, we thought we got away from the UK. We thought we got away from being under the king or queen or under Parliament, but in fact, we didn't. It just appeared as if we did.
Absolutely. Well, you read the treaty, read the peace treaty, Treaty of Paris, and the outlining of the peace after the Revolutionary War was dictated by the King of France, who was also the King of England at the time. He was controlling both, and it says right there that he was, that he's the Prince Elector, and the Arch Treasurer. Well, if you're the Prince Elector and Arch Treasurer of the United States, then doesn't sound much to me like the United States won any war.
No, it just made it look like an appearance. I mean, it just, and that's why I like going down and exploring history, because I mean, history is not what we've been taught it to be. So the more that we can do research and the more that we can try to figure out what actually happened gives us a better idea of what we're trying to change. Because that's one of the biggest arguments that I have with people when they talk about status correction is, what are we correcting? Because again, prior to the U.S. amendment status, the U.S. citizenship status, I'm not really convinced that there was a status that people were given. You were just an American. You were a Virginian, a Marylandian, whatever the situation might be, whatever state you lived in. But whether the word citizen existed, I don't know. I've got a manual that talks about American citizen, but that's not written down anywhere. And there should be somewhere in the history book, somewhere in the Library of Congress, somewhere where it talks about what existed as far as a status before the 14th Amendment. Because you got to think about like the time period of like cowboys and Indians. During that time period, you had like gunslingers on the street that would agree to shoot each other. And it wasn't a crime because they both agreed. Presidents dueled with swords. And it was okay as long as they agreed to do it. So there was a difference of people and what they could and couldn't do prior to the US citizenship status. And then the U.S. citizenship status thing seems to put us underneath the jurisdiction of the federal government, which made us under the law. Whereas before, there was a different capacity in a way a sovereign individual, a self-sovereign individual would be. And that's kind of what I think about when I think about the Western time period. And I'm sure that in between the Revolutionary War and the Western time period, it was very, very similar because the stories that I've heard about I think it was Aaron Burr might have been the
Right,
president. And
right. I remember.
that was before the Civil War. And
Correct.
the Civil Wars from the 1776 to was like 1860s, 1850s. I mean, that was less than 100 years.
Yeah. So yeah, Civil War 1761. Right. Well, and if you look at really, if you go back
1860, 1861. It was in 18
1861.
the formation of the country. 1776 was supposed to be,
Right.
Independence Day.
Right. 1861 is when the Lieber Code came out, which were the rules for the standing army on foreign territory,
Yeah,
which
it was
was
like
written for the Civil War.
General Order number 100 or something like that from Lincoln.
Correct. Yeah. He had Charles Libris from France write that. And but you go back to the beginning of the nation, and you're talking about, like the Western Times or whatever, and what was there before the 14th Amendment as far as a citizenship? Well, they were subjects, and that's what the status was for people from England or that
I
were
know, but
underneath the
Billy the
British Crown.
Kid and all those guys, they weren't subjects.
I don't know. I've not seen any legal documentation on any of them, so it would be hard saying. Now, though, that 7 out of the first 8 presidents were all British subjects. And so that kind of throws the whole you've got to be a U.S. citizen to be president thing out the window. But yeah,
Yeah,
7
well,
out of
that
the
didn't
first 8.
obviously, yeah, that wasn't the case back then because
Yeah.
really nobody was a U.S. citizen because it didn't even exist.
Right. No.
It's funny how we just put this game together of all these different rules that get changed by the older brother as we're playing the game constantly.
Well, the status was subject is what they were referred to. Even Benjamin Franklin was a British subject. He never became a U.S. citizen.
He worked within the British system, but I mean, people like George Washington. I mean, I feel as if when they were rebelling against the king in Parliament, that they were absolved of that subject. Like they weren't subject anymore because they stood their ground against it. And
If
technically, they won. It's just we owed money to bankers that lent us the money to win.
Well, yeah, a lot of money was actually lent by France, and France, like any good debtor, any good creditor, rather, that creditor went and sold it to a third-party debt collector, which happened to be the City of London. So, and we've had a third-party debt collector on our butt ever since.
Right. And the city of London is going to work for the best interest of the crown itself. So there is a distinction between the Crown Incorporated and the Crown.
Right.
But they're going to work hand in hand together.
Yeah.
And look out for each other's best interests because what affects if somebody comes in and tries to take over the UK, they're going to obviously get the city of London, which even though it's a sovereign state, if a warring nation came in and just abolished people and took over, it wouldn't be sovereign anymore. So
Well, and that was all actually relinquished to Pope Innocent III by the king. King John relinquished all that over to the Pope, basically because he was afraid that he lost his line in, the pearly gates. So,
and that's a confusing ordeal, the whole trade-off between popes and kings and back and forth, and whether what one pope did is still in effect versus what, because like with the at least with the monarchy, things like the Seste KV, you can see where other kings and queens have accepted it as law and not changed it.
right.
But where in the other aspect, I don't feel like it's the same way.
Yeah. And you're talking about the money situation. I find the money thing really interesting. Um, be- and the people that goes back to, if anybody's read like The Agony and the Ecstasy by Michelangelo, or rather the biography from Michelangelo, he was, sequestered to do his work by the Medici family. And he worked under the Medicis, and they were kind of the beginners of the big banking cartel and Jesuits, Knights Templar, etc. Was all involved with that.
Yeah, that's an interesting story.
Yeah, and I find that book to be really, really interesting on a lot of different levels.
I've never checked the book out.
Yeah, and you're talking about the direction that people flowed in, especially like regarding like the Phoenicians and stuff like that, and that's what because I got pretty well settled with how I've positioned myself as far as like the legal matters go.
Sorry.
And I really wanted to figure out more like personal things regarding me, but it's not just about me, it's about everybody. But for instance, being blonde hair and blue eyes, it's like, where did that come from? And you find really a good consensus that that was created around the Black Sea area and was kind of a genetic anomaly. And those people moved into like the land of Canaan, and they were the Phoenicians. Phoenician actually means red, and those people, when they all dispersed and a lot of the tribes dispersed, headed up towards the Russian direction and lived in the Russian area. And even the word Russia means red. And so you're finding just so many little similarities like that. And that being the real origin of the blonde hair, blue eyes. And to me, it's like those people of Babylon just kind of migrated their way back into the USA, into North America. And who did we have to vote for here 5, 6 years ago? And, either a redheaded guy or a blonde-headed woman. You know,
Interesting analogy there.
yeah. So I think the more I look at like history and the immigration of people, the more and more that I'm finding so much deceit has been fed to us. And this goes, even right into North America here and what people generally think of regarding slavery. You see, the settlers that came here were all indentured servants.
Well,
That
apparently there was like a fair skinned, almost white, red haired race of or species of humans that were in Africa at one point and seemed to have left or been killed off. So there's a lot that we haven't really been told the truth about. Even Native Americans, if you really do some digging and you look, especially if you're looking at things from like a Moorish science perspective, you're going to get the whole idea that a lot of the black people were copper skinned Native Americans and a lot of those Native Americans were replaced in history with what we call Native Americans today.
right,
Whether that's, I've seen some pictures of older Native Americans that look like what we would consider to be like African American. And then that theory goes into the whole idea that the slaves didn't come from Africa, that these people were already here. And that's the one of the arguments that the Moors talk about is that they're the Aboriginal people, not when you look at it from the etymology of the word, but what we define Aboriginal or indigenous, that they were here before we were here. So they're not that's the argument with that. So it's very fascinating when you look into that. I mean, that's why sometimes it gets frustrating for me because I'm not even 100% sure that the continents that we know them as are really truly where everything was. I'm not sure about the calendar. So it's like we don't know our history. We don't know when it began. We don't know where we are. We don't know what continent we're technically on. I mean, I've heard all kinds of theories about the United States being where Sumeria and Babylon was, and that over in the Arizona area was Israel. That's not what the
yeah,
rest of the world recognizes. There's also supposed to be a country or empire named Tartaria that existed that Some maps show and some don't. So it's like,
Yeah.
what's real and what's not real.
Yeah, and if you look at the continents, you can see how they actually could have been more connected at one time. And there's
The
something,
Pangea idea, and I mean that's definitely scientifically provable that, like in a sense, the land mass started out as one piece and then broke apart throughout
yeah.
time through shifting of the planet, growth of the planet, or whatever the situation might be that we're not fully aware of.
Well, and there's somebody written in the Bible in the Old Testament by the name of Peleg, Peleg, and his name supposedly was to mean because in his day the earth divided. And there was something I posted a while ago that was written by Benjamin Franklin, and he was writing about his experience in coming here. And he said the people that he saw here were more brown or tawny, he called them Tawney, which means dark skinned. And he
I've
said the
been
rarely,
copper skinned a lot too,
right?
which is similar.
Yeah. So, you
So
know,
who? I mean, who knows? I mean, I know that they were the American government, U.S. government. They were selling ways that people who weren't Native American claimed to be Native American back late 1800s, early 1900s. This
yeah,
was something I was going to try to dig in. I mean, there's so many different things that I want to dig into. It's time and being able to dig into all these different things,
I like a lot of
and
the,
whether or not the time that goes into it is worth putting into it.
yeah. Well, I like a lot of the research that Dane Calloway has done. You can check out Dane Calloway on YouTube, and he shows a lot of his resources also
Okay.
on these matters. Yeah, I'm not a believer in the out of Africa theory. I think that was a way to make people feel like they weren't part of something that actually they really were a part of, and that really did belong to them originally. It's something that you could see somebody that wants to rule the world, something they would do.
Sadly, yeah, I agree.
Yeah. Well, we're just going to have kind of like an hour long call here. I was going to open up if anybody on here, let me go take a peek, had anything they wanted to bring up.
I
We
really
could
wish I
open the
could see this
lines.
thing.
There's a way that you can. I'm
It's
not
so
sure
weird.
how it
I
is.
wish I could like show you what like it's because it's like I'm on the link. I even did it on my phone to see if it would pull up, and it says live stream is offline. Please wait for the moderator to start the stream. And then at the top, above all that, above the join online studio or dial this number, it has it says live.
All right.
Um, let's see here. Okay, I see a chat. So now I'm at least seeing communication.
Yeah. I didn't really make
We
out.
have an El Hotep. I can't really quite. I apologize. Make out the rest of the name. Hotep Ekemwi.
Yeah, Piero, that is my co-host. Let me open up. I'm gonna unmute you. That's his name is actually Keith. Keith, if you had something, feel free to jump in. I've opened your mic up.
Greetings, Chris. How you doing, brother?
Doing good, man. How are you doing?
Good, good. It's El Hotep Sekemwe Pero.
What is the Sekemwe?
Sekemwe stands for between the two. Hotep
Okay.
means peace,
Mm-hmm.
and then Pero means temple, and El, of course.
Now
Oops.
that's not a Moorish thing, is it?
Actually, it's Kemet prior to the development of Egypt, north and south.
Kemet, correct.
Right, and
That's where that little frog meme thing comes from.
Yep. And it actually it stands for peace between the two, and that's between the temple and the body and the god. And it actually came about because of the peace between North and South Egypt.
Okay. And what is this website?
And I hope you don't mind, Brian. Somebody asked about my website, and so or my YouTube, so I post my YouTube and let them know I had a website too.
Yeah, that's cool.
Just information that I posted. It's a dot art extension, so it's non-commercial, and you notice it's based on I've got a express trust through the PMA, a faith-based union. It's got adoptions and notices,
Okay.
and that's basically all they operate in their own legal world is adoptions and notices. You notice the municipal code is an adoption, the county codes are adopted, state codes are adopted, everything's adopted, and they actually all are adopted from the original ancient scripture.
Interesting. So you're the co-host of this show with Mr. Brian?
Well, I've been trying to be. I've had some ups and downs here lately. I haven't been too competent here in the last couple months, but I'm glad to finally make it on again tonight.
That's awesome.
Good to have you. Good to have you. Keith, let me see. I think I've got everybody unmuted that wants to be unmuted. If anybody had any question or anything like that, feel free. Just unmuted the whole board, so if you've got noise going on in the background and want to keep it blocked out, feel free to mute yourself. If anybody had a question for Chris or anything before we sign off here, feel free.
Yeah, I'm definitely an open book if anybody has any questions, or they can reach me at my email, ricemediagroup@protonmail.com. But yeah, I'm definitely open. And let me know when you want to do more of these conversations. I meant to come on sooner. I know you've invited me, and it just kind of slipped both of our minds, but definitely keep me updated.
Well, you've had some travel events too, and things that you had to go to and get done, and we had the holidays and all that kind of stuff. So I figured I'd just wait a few weeks and try and find a spot maybe where things had slowed down a little bit for you. So
it's slowed down, but it's busy in chunks. But at the same time, I've been pretty much like live streaming most of today. Shouldn't say most of today, but I did 2-hour live streams plus this, which we're at an hour. So,
yeah.
But I feel at the same time like I owe it to you for coming on my show. And I just kept myself functionable where I could think and speak correctly the way I wanted to until I got on the show.
Well, I just want to do some cross promotion with you, basically, send people your direction as well, since you interview a number of very interesting people and people that make you think, which is the kind of stuff I like.
Yeah, no, I appreciate you saying that.
Well, and people, I try and mention this every week, because people ask, what should I learn? What should I research? And what I tell people is you need to really find who you really are, where you're really at, because you've been deceived. And when you really learn where you're really at, what you're really about, where you really are, little light bulbs start coming on that you didn't realize existed.
No, I would agree. It definitely starts with you learning, not only, who you are and what you're about, but to love yourself so that you can give back that much more to others.
And probably most importantly, where we're really from.
Yeah, where are we from?
Where are we from? Yeah. I think that's probably what's been tried to be hidden from us the most.
Hidden from the Samoans?
Hey, Matthew, how you doing?
Hey, good. I wanted to ask Rice a question real quick.
Yeah.
That's all right. Actually, I came across you. I heard, I think maybe like three different times in my research, and so I was really stoked to hear. I don't know. It all loops back around. It seems like in this realm of research and stuff, where people are actually thinking and trying to figure things out. But since you've had a lot of exposure to all kinds of different concepts and stuff, I wanted to compliment what Brian just said and ask you, because when you get into that, who you are, there's always this concept of God in there, and I just want to see what your take is on the supreme order of things and the concept of God, just in short. I know that can snowball, but
I definitely believe in a creator source. I was raised with Christian values and really kind of rebelled against a lot of that because of like how the church and a lot of those people who call themselves Christians act. Started studying other faiths and looking into other religions and spirituality, and started thinking for myself and questioning things, and it still kind of comes back to Jesus for me. I call myself a practicing Christian, not a Christian, because like if you were a Buddhist, you don't call yourself a Buddhist, you would call yourself a practicing Buddhist, because a Buddhist would have achieved enlightenment. And to me, a Christian walks in a Christ-like walk. And I fail at that. So I'm a practicing Christian. And that's how I think most Christians should view themselves. But that just kind of encompasses Jesus's two teachings of love God with all your heart and love your brother, and now add your sister as you love yourself. And that's why I said it starts with us individually. We have to learn to love ourselves, because we can't love anybody more than we love ourselves. We can't give more than we have. And you can't properly show love to God without doing it by showing love to your brother and your sister as you would treat yourself. I hope that makes sense.
Wouldn't that change a lot of things in the world?
May I?
Hey,
Yeah.
Keith.
In my respects, you asked about that biblical reference and stuff, and so I point out Jeremiah 1:5, where it starts out, "Before I formed thee in the belly, I knew thee." So before I was even formed in the belly in the earthly sense, there was a knowing prior to that. That's where I come from, knowledge. And if I want to return, prodigal son, the spendthrift son that wasted his time not learning, to my Father which art in heaven, I have to have that knowledge. Okay. That's where I was formed, and that's where I have to go back to. In the meantime, we've all been indoctrinated through programming. Professional grammar, just like computer programming. It's professional grammar for each different set of jurisdictions. Binary is different than basic. Basic is different than Pascal. They all have their own programming. Professional grammar. And that's what we're stuck in today, programming. We need to get back to the original word. With that, I yield.
Right on, Keith.
Love it.
Yeah, Jeremiah 1:5. That's what I was going to say. That's what I call our original jurisdiction. Go ahead, Matt.
I was going to say, would you call that various programming per versions of the truth?
Yes, because we use different grammar. Politicians use different grammar than journalists. Journalists use different grammar than bankers. Bankers use different grammar than lawyers. Legislators use different grammar than lawyers. They're all using different grammar, and that's the construct of the English language. It's nothing but babble. Anybody can use it, but you have to state
right. And then they each version have their own version, which creates a perversion of the actual truth of things, which brings us all here speaking and trying to elaborate on the concepts, I guess.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
This is what I call fellowship. It's what I call fellowship. I always appreciate the insight from others. So thanks, Chris.
I appreciate you lending an ear and listening, man. And thanks for joining in.
Yeah, I agree, Chris. We need that. People think we're wise and worthy. We're not, unless we have people that are willing to hear and then take action and not follow suit or try to become new leaders or anything, because I'm not a leader. I want you to step up hand in hand with me, because that's what it is, at arm's length.
Yeah. Lead by example. I mean, just be the change. That's why my whole philosophy of practice change. Just be the change that you want to see in this world. And the more that you do that, the more of an example that you set for other people to follow in that process of being the change that they want to see. And if everybody starts with that mindset and the idea of treating people how you want to be treated, we really can transform the world. But it's going to take a lot of pain and stuff that we've dealt with throughout history, that we've perpetrated upon ourselves, all the division, all the different things to allow us to come back together.
Yeah, well, and I tell people all the time, it's like riding a bike. It's not going to happen overnight. You're going to have to practice it. And the more you practice it, the better you get at it. Just don't get frustrated, because that's our intent and our duty.
Right. Just learn.
Brother's keeper. And our brother's keeper is to give him knowledge in case he should be fallen.
Right, and don't dwell in the negative. Learn from it and keep moving forward.
Yep, that's an excellent way, I think, to close out this evening, Chris. Thanks for being here.
Appreciate it.
Absolutely, been a pleasure. And we'll see you all again every Sunday night, 9 p.m. Eastern. Good night, guys.
Yes, glad I made it. God bless everybody.
Thanks, Keith.
Night, y'all.
Good night. Bye.